Welcome to Rewired Sober, the podcast that breaks down the real reasons women turn to alcohol. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a character flaw. It was your neurobiology, your conditioning, and the systems that taught women to silence themselves instead of support themselves. I'm your host, Kate Vitella. I've been a registered nurse for well over 2 decades, trained in addiction and mental health, a bit neuroscience obsessed, but spiritually grounded. This is the science and soul work of a woman's recovery, where I help you understand what's happening in your sober brain and reconnect to that deeper inner truth you've always had, that soul level knowing, the intuition the patriarchy has tried to train out of you. When women combine the science of the brain rewiring with that inner knowing, you stop feeling broken and you start feeling powerful. So let's get into it. Today's episode is going to be on some topics pretty near and dear to my heart and my recovery journey. Body image, drinking, womaning, and shame. Shame. I'm going to be talking about all of it. Shame as a tool, and body image being our cage, and hunger as a weapon, and how drinking becomes sort of the off-ramp for women who were never really allowed to take up space. Now, what I'm about to say here is food for thought, no pun intended. It's not something that I'm going to always have a citation for, so I want you to sort of ruminate on this as a concept, but do your own research here, and in the fact that I made correlations between various bodies of work. And share this with a girlfriend that you think this might be helpful to, or send me a message about what your thoughts are. I was so charged up about this topic. I did not look for a guest. I did not have time to be looking around the internet for anyone who's read all of these books and has this theory that I do. Also, as usual, I have way too much to say. So back with my self-editing tools on the podcast and fumbling with technology, I am going to do the best I can to produce a good episode here and not give you guys a complete ramble. But if you hear me shuffling papers, books, dropping things, punching my computer and having a meltdown, it's because I am still trying to learn to edit these podcasts on my own. So asking for grace here. So let's start with the foundation of this episode. Weaponizing shame and what it means, especially for women who drink. Now, this concept has been circling my brain a lot lately. Weaponized shame is when shame isn't just an emotion. It's used as a tool to control, to silence, or to keep someone in line. And girls, oh honey, we have been the preferred targets for weaponized shame. And the main reason is shame has historically kept women pretty freaking manageable. Be good, be quiet, be small, be pleasing, be pretty, be grateful. And if you step out of line, you don't just get corrected, you get shamed. Now, caveat here, men don't just do this to women. The patriarchy doesn't just do this to women. Women do it to each other, right? If you're too loud, we call her a drama queen. Too passionate, oh, she got all hysterical. You know, women are slut-shamed if they're too sexual. We slut-shame each other. Too assertive, oh, she's a bitch. You know, too emotional, she's just unstable. And the message is crystal clear. Shrink yourself or we'll do it for you. And so this is where I'm going into the story here. Enter the book Girl on Girl by Sophie Gilbert. Oh my God. I heard about this book, I think from Holly Whitaker on one of her reading lists. And I was not super interested at first because although I do like some pop culture here and there, love some fashion, I'm not, a self-proclaimed pop culture junkie. But there were a few reasons this book just hit me hard. First of all, The title, Girl on Girl, but the subtitle, How Pop Culture Turned a Generation of Women Against Themselves. Now, I'm a feminist, and that hit me hard. Also, I'm 46 years old, and I was of the legal drinking age in year 2000. And this book is mostly about pop culture in the aughts and what was going on with women on TV, and then enter social media. Now, another reason this book hit me hard, she mentions one of my favorite Quit Lit authors, who is Knapp, whose work in early recovery was a game changer for me. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But Sophie Gilbert, in her book, covers roughly the last 20 years of female pop culture through media, music, reality TV. She talks about that a lot, branding, and a lot of public scandal. Now, I'm going to make the leap to connect this with shame and the expectations of women to drinking, all in those same 2 decades. She doesn't say this directly in the book, and that's why I said this is just kind of food for thought. But what I heard screaming at me loud and clear, as a feminist, as a sober woman, especially someone who's overcome disordered eating, drunkorexia, drinking, and survived the 2000s with low-rise jeans and a belly button piercing and spray tans. I mean, come on now. This was the correlation I made. So women's drinking rates did skyrocket. Now that we can prove. According to a 2021 U.S. study, binge drinking among women ages 30 to 49, now my demographic, nearly doubled between 2006 and 2020. Okay, so correlation isn't causation, but culturally, we grew from the same soil. The constant scrutiny, the unrealistic beauty standards, the hypersexualization of women, and hustle culture, and mom shaming, and this online comparison, even the having it all, quote, mythology between being a working mom and a power mom and a mom at home and a diva in the sheets and a queen in the kitchen. I mean, women are pressured from every angle, not just to live their lives, but like to prove their lives. And that constant pressure cooker really creates a nervous system on high alert. So it's no freaking wonder alcohol becomes the off button. Now you can see how I made this correlation here. And the cruel twist of all of it, when I was reading this book, this is what stood out to me the most. This is the culture we live in. The culture shames women for drinking. That is no surprise. But this very same culture helped create the emotional burdens that led us here. Now, the chapter that stopped everything for me, like I sat down, made some notes. Oh my God, light bulbs went off. All these, intersections came together in my mind, was the chapter called Beautiful Girl, the goldmine of impossible expectations. And I was like, is she talking about my 20s? This chapter focuses a lot on beauty standards and body image and diet culture. And the author talks about everyone from Jessica Simpson being shamed for that time she got on stage in those mom jeans to, of course, the Kardashians and the big butts. And she even brings up the old heroin-chic image that came back, recently. And that was really popular. The heroin-chic body image was really popular in the aughts. And this is where she brought up the author Knapp. Now, Knapp wrote Drinking a Love Story. And that was one of the books I read at about 2 or 3 years sober. I sat down and literally read it cover to cover. And I cried, I underlined, I took notes. It was equal parts gut-wrenching, and it so closely hit home to my own story because she talks a lot about anorexia in this book. There was a correlation between her anorexia and her drinking. Then Knapp went on to write the book Appetites, which really went in hard on her eating disorder. Except for what I got from the book Appetites was that she wasn't always necessarily talking about food. She was asking the questions, women weren't really allowed to ask out loud. And when I read this, it hit home so much for me because a big part of my story, especially around the 2-year mark of sobriety, was facing my disordered eating. I had gotten sober in 2018 and continued to binge eat and purge and starve myself and do all these crazy things to maintain a level of weight and body image I thought was acceptable. But after a couple years sober, I was like, I can't live this way anymore. I can't live this dichotomy. And I cannot be showing up online, hosting sober mom meetings and recovering out loud and not address this elephant in the room, which was, I have a raging eating disorder. And so I started talking about it. And especially after I read Carolyn Knapp's book, Appetites, I talked about it out loud. I hashtagged Drunkorexia. I made t-shirts for the Sober Curator that said, fuck heroin-chic. Hashtag fuck heroin-chic. Because that was, that hashtag was trending again. Like, are you kidding me? And I wrote an article for the Sober Curator. I'll try to link it in the show notes, about how growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was obsessed with Cindy Crawford workout and being a certain size and, Kate Moss on the cover of every magazine, just all of it. Needless to say, back to what I'm talking about, these books were pivotal in my recovery. And so was healing my anorexia. Because in this book, Carolyn talks about what would actually satisfy me, right? When she's talking about appetite, she's saying, how much do I really need and of what? What are the real hungers sitting underneath the story I tell the world about, wanting to be thin or pretty or put together? And her argument is brutally honest. Women are trained to curb and to disguise or reroute their desires into something that's more acceptable. Thinness, beauty, being pleasant. Thinness is always acceptable. Being in control and even trying to act and look low maintenance. And we really were taught to want safely, quietly, in a small way without being too much. And when we followed the rules, for a long enough period of time, we start confusing the surface want with the soul want. And we start fixating on our bodies because it feels less dangerous than asking for real nourishment. And Carolyn Knapp says anorexia and body obsession aren't fundamentally about food. They're about the entitlement to want. So you can see how quickly this book about pop culture, mentioning Carolyn Knapp, I go on to this other deep dive about feminism and diet culture. And then I reread parts of Carolyn's book, and I am just back in the 2000s. I'm back even in 2 years of sobriety when I made the Fuck Heroin Chic t-shirts, which I still own and wear and handed out in New York at New York Fashion Week, and people took them and wore them. So I will say that as my claim to fame. Claim to flame. Wow. I'm not even editing that because that's pretty fucking good. Okay. So one of the paragraphs in Carolyn Knapp's book that literally brought me to my knees was, she writes, and I'm going to read this verbatim from her book. My great terror during the early years of therapy concerned the opposite belief, namely that if I escaped the anorexic prison and truly surrendered all that hard-won control over appetite, two things would happen. I'd be so consumed with need and desire, I'd never stop eating. And I'd find this so horrifying, I'd have no choice but to lock myself back up, this time in a maximum security unit with an even harsher warden. And that broke me in half because I realized this need is so much deeper than food. And fundamentally, right, having the right to say, I deserve rest, I deserve connection, I deserve a life that feels like it's mine. You know, it's so much more socially acceptable for women to count calories than to confront the deeper questions. Like, what would really fulfill me? How much love, rest, connection, and meaning do I actually need to feel whole? And when Knapp talks about, quote, real hungers, she's naming the truth most women have been conditioned to avoid. And the underlying theme here is that this issue is not about cake or jean size. It's a soul level need. And it's the hunger for a life that fits. It's the hunger to be known, to be rested, to be cared for, to be seen. The hunger to belong and to want without shame. And really, until we can name that, personally, until I could name that part of the hunger, I was just trying to solve a spiritual and emotional ache with the tools that I had, which was dieting, more perfectionism, more exercise, more overachieving. And for me to heal my disordered eating, well, first I had to get sober and clear-minded. And then I had to dive in to the real emotional aspects. Like, what does your soul need? And why have you been abandoning yourself for so long? Now, I devoted a whole other episode back when the podcast was called You've Been Selected to my disordered eating journey and how I got through it and basically kind of healed. But I'm going to keep talking about this because this is a huge issue for women. Okay, back to Girl on Girl, the book about pop culture that fucking rocked my world. Okay, so then Sophie Gilbert quotes Naomi Wolf, who is a feminist author, journalist. She wrote the book, The Beauty Myth. Now, I think Naomi Wolf got a little bit scandalous and she was called out for some stuff about COVID and some other weird political things. I don't know. But she got something right, and she got this quote right. I have not read the book, The Beauty Myth, but I'm going to next. But she says, and again, another quote, I scribbled down, I obsessed over it, and then I posted this on social media. The power of what women want, what women really want, is so forceful, so potentially iconoclastic, that the only way to control it is to distract us with self-loathing and the lifelong project of self-maintenance. So this launches me straight into the next truth. Women being thin, there are many, many theories that this has been a political tool. At the heart of it, a woman who is hungry, who is fixated on her body, constantly self-monitoring, is far easier to control. When we're looking at a woman who is well-fed, rested, resourced enough to challenge the oppressing systems around her, there's a vast difference. So this is not accidental. This is social conditioning, and it has a purpose. And so essentially a starving woman is a distracted woman. Hunger is not just a physical state. It's a cognitive one. When you're starving, you're dieting, you're restricting, counting, obsessing, your brain becomes consumed with food. I mean, if you've ever been on a diet, what do you think about when you wake up? Food. What do you think about when you go to bed? Food. If you've ever tried a new workout plan, what do you think about? How many reps? How many steps? You're checking your Fitbit. It's about self-surveillance. And you don't have the capacity, essentially, to revolt. You barely have the capacity to think clearly. And anyone who's ever dieted knows that this hunger hijacks your mind. And it's not an empowering look for women. It's incapacitation, really, but for decades. Quick pause here, folks, because some of you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, I'm on a sober journey, but I still feel stuck. Yeah, that's normal. Removing the alcohol is one thing. Rewiring the brain, rebuilding your actual life is the real work. And that's why I created the Rewired Sober coaching program. It's 3 months where we combine neuroscience, soul work with weekly live support calls so you can actually understand what's happening in your head and your body. You can start anytime, you get immediate access, and you don't have to figure this all out alone. If you're ready for transformation, the link to join is in the show notes, and I hope to see you there. Now back to the show. The beauty ideal for women has essentially been be so thin, be thin enough to be like basically fragile looking, and the feminist angle would say it's saying be small enough to be no threat. And enter in the Ozempic era, and so much of the heroin-chic and all of that is back. It's back with a vengeance. Even when I talk about the fashion world, which I often do because I love fashion, there was a brief spark in history where we promoted body positivity, and we are right back to rail-thin models and heroin-chic. And women who were taught to hate their bodies, let's face it, they don't campaign for power. If you can keep a woman at war with her body, she will be way too busy battling herself to battle the system. She will turn her rage inward. She will turn her exhaustion inward. She'll turn her dissatisfaction inward. What I see is a woman who's counting calories and obsessing over it is certainly not counting the injustices of the world, is certainly not obsessing over ICE and women's rights. And not that there's anything wrong with dieting and counting calories. I mean, the world expects this of us. But it's about being mentally consumed and obsessed by it. Trying to skip meals and punishing your body. It's really punishing your body. It's not punishing your oppressor, right? It's not rising up. And diet culture has become sort of a political sedative. I mean, I said it. The thin woman, that thin woman ideal, it keeps women weak. You've heard this on several feminist podcasts lately. To stay extremely thin, you have to stay in a caloric deficit, underfed. But underfed essentially means less hormonal stability, less cognitive clarity, less strength, less emotional regulation. And, no revolution in history has been fueled by a bunch of skinny bitches living on 1,200 calories and shame. I'm just pointing that out here, folks. Now, I am guilty of this too. I have been ransacked by disordered eating and shame and body image my whole life. But I've come to know that obsessing over my appearance is a full-time job, and I don't got time for that. I don't want to spend hours and hours obsessing over food. I don't want to exercise punitively. And that is why I talk so much in my Rewired Sober coaching program about moving your body. I don't call it exercise. You need purposeful movement. Go for a walk, right? You don't need to spend thousands of dollars on clean eating. You maybe just need a little bit more mental space. So you get the point here. And from a feminist lens, the patriarchy, they don't have to police women when women are too busy policing themselves. It's the freaking oldest trick in the book. Historically, controlling the woman's body has always been a way to control their power. This has historically always been. Starve them of choice, starve them of personal agency, starve them of desire, with nutrition. And then tell them it's their fault for not being thin enough or good enough or disciplined enough. It's actually fucking brilliant in a horrifying way. It's a brilliant scheme. The modern thinness obsession is a bit strategic. It's not just a body image aesthetic. So we got to call it what it is. Diet culture in general is one of the most effective depoliticizing tools ever invented. A woman whose hunger is weaponized against her is easier to silence. Full stop. A woman who's obsessed with her flaws is not overthrowing the damn thing, is not overthrowing the patriarchy. Okay, deep breath. This ties directly to drinking. Essentially, if you starve a woman of food, rest, pleasure, and desire, If you starve a woman of self-trust and self-agency, she'll find something to fill the ache. And alcohol will step in as the socially acceptable feminine coping mechanism. Glass of wine, looking fancy with that martini. Wine culture's a lot like diet culture's sister. They both say don't eat too much and don't feel too much. And shame becomes so internalized. And that's where drinking sneaks in on us. Here's the kicker. Once shame is weaponized at you long enough, you don't really need anyone else to do it. Your brain does it automatically. You start believing this shit. You start believing like, okay, I'm not enough, or I'm way too much, or I should be able to do this or that. It's like your emotional system gets backed up like it's stuck in a traffic jam. And alcohol is your off-ramp. So I have to keep saying this, but drinking becomes your socially acceptable pressure valve. And maybe that's why Laura McCowan's term, it's not your fault necessarily, but it is your responsibility, comes into play here for me. Because shame and the female nervous system, it's like the perfect storm. Shame is a survival emotion, okay? It triggers that same threat response as physical danger. Women are conditioned from childhood, and we fear rejection. We fear being labeled as difficult or being, disapproved of. So when we get shamed, when shame hits us, it's like the brain panics. And alcohol, it acts like a lightning fast GABA surge that shuts down those threat circuits. It's relief. It's temporary, but it's powerful. And a lot of women have told me they don't even drink to get drunk, but just to quiet the noise. So, the cruel part is we drink because we feel shame, and then we feel shame about the drinking, which makes us drink more. So it's really not about willpower. It's like a closed shame loop built over generations. I mean, there's even something to my brand name here. There's a reason why I call it Rewired Sober. And part of it is because as a woman, I have to intellectualize this recovery process with rigor in order to be taken seriously. I have to come at this as a board-certified addiction RN that understands neuroplasticity and come at this from a science lens in order to be taken seriously, right? I can't just get on this podcast and say, it's not about willpower. Women need to, because women aren't taken seriously. I see men as coaches out there saying all kinds of crap. And their messaging, like, taken seriously. Whereas my messaging, I had to come from a place of authority, And as I went along with my brand Rewired Sober, at some point, this realization of how I had been shamed so much in all of this really brought me to the piece about soul recovery. It can't just be neuroplasticity. This has to be the science and the soul of a woman's recovery, because weaponized shame is a big reason why women drink and hide their drinking. We don't want to be the hot mess mom. We don't want to be a bad wife. We don't want to be the problem. We've drank in private. We drank quietly. And so many women have come to me like they almost drank neatly in a sense, and not out of a sense of deception, but like a survival strategy. And what I find, and this pop culture book was so good, culturally, shame is still used to discipline women. And so I hear women getting shamed for being moms. They're shamed for being child-free. They're shamed for aging. They're shamed for getting Botox, shamed for wanting more. The shame, all you have to do to make a woman fall back in line is make her feel ashamed. And sobriety is your rebellion here. And that's why I'm bringing this topic here. Weaponized shame is a sobriety issue. And If drinking is often a response to chronic shame, then your sobriety is not just a personal health choice. It's a feminist act. I posted this on social media. Your sobriety is saying, you don't get to fucking control me anymore with shame. And you're going to stop playing by the rules that were built to keep you small. You stop apologizing for your humanity. The soul voice, you start listening to it. You start trusting your own knowing. Now, another thing I wanted to bring up here was the concept of drunkorexia, because I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I want to circle back and explain this a little bit. So drunkorexia is a term that was coined for college girls, essentially. And the concept was around restricting calories reserved for booze. And it was prominent in early college years. But when I started coaching and I began talking with other women, especially midlife women, we weren't really calling it drunkorexia per se, but that same logic was still there. I mean, as a midlife woman, we're still using that same drunkorexia type logic. And that's where diet culture, body image, and drinking all come into an interplay here. I mean, okay, so the drunkorexia behavior will shift with age, but the rules stay the same. I hear women saying, I didn't eat carbs because we were going to have wine. Or I have to work out extra tomorrow because, I'm going to be drinking. Or I'll just skip dinner because I'm going to be drinking. And this is my treat to drink and I'll be good tomorrow. It's like grown-up drunkorexia. It's that same hunger punishment game. We just church it up with wellness language. And we even church it up with fears about weight gain in perimenopause. And what I see when this happens is the nervous system just stays dysregulated. And not to mention, we just keep the shame cycle alive. There's actual neuroscience on why drunkorexia, restricting food reserved for alcohol, it hits women harder. Okay, so when you restrict food, your prefrontal cortex weakens. So good fucking bye to decision making. And your reward circuitry, it actually gets hypersensitive. So hello, impulsivity, right? Your blood sugar crashes and the alcohol hits you harder, and alcohol becomes more reinforcing, more dopamine, more bang for your buck. You get drunk faster. Then you have regret and shame. And it makes women overall more vulnerable to blackouts, more likely to binge drink, more likely to lose control, and more likely to spiral back into shame. Now, as we've come to know, this is not a moral failure. It's a bit of a neurobiological setup. A hungry brain plus alcohol, #drunkorexia, it hijacks your survival system. And the honest to God feminist truth about drunkorexia is it kind of benefits everyone except the woman. Yeah, I'm going here. Okay, I'm going here. Who benefits when women are hungry and drunk, right? The diet industry, billions of dollars. Big alcohol, billions of dollars. Beauty culture, lifelong insecurity. The patriarchy, as women are too busy self-policing to rise up. Who loses here? Women. I lost teeth, okay? Women lose their health, their safety, their joy, their power. And so it's not a joke. It's not just girl math, right? It's a symptom of a culture that profits from women being underfed, overworked, and self-doubting and checked out. Drunkorexia is what happens when you combine diet culture with drinking culture and you stir it inside a patriarchal blender. We just get hungrier, tipsier, more ashamed, distracted. And I can't help but tie this all in to pop culture and the normalization of shaming women on screen for body image and expecting hypersexuality to please the male gaze, but yet we slut shame then. I mean, there's even a section in the book. Okay, I'm going to digress big time here because I have to say this, and I won't ruin it for you because I still want you to read the book. There's a section in the book where she talks about Pamela Anderson's famous sex tape that with Tommy Lee gets stolen and leaked, and people are making money off of her sex tape, right? Imagery, footage of her nude. She tries to sue, and the judge comes back at her and says, because you posed for Playboy already, then this is sort of like no new news, right? It's not really egregious because we've already seen you naked. Like, you gave up your right for privacy of your own body because you posed for Playboy. I mean, hello, 2005. That was our life. And then social media took over, and there's so many awesome points here. And what I can't help continually coming back to is, no wonder we fucking drank. No wonder we drank. No wonder we drank. No wonder we drank. No wonder we hated ourselves. No wonder we starved ourselves. No wonder we pay millions of dollars for cosmetic surgery. It's no fucking wonder. But there's a reclamation in the sense that we can take our power back by feeding ourselves, literally and spiritually, by refusing to starve our bodies or our desires, and by stopping the war with our own hunger, letting it guide us, listening to it, letting it guide us instead of shame us. And this sounds corny, but we can honestly take our power back when we decide collectively, personally, that our worth isn't measured in calories or thinness. That doesn't say how good we are. You know, I see women rising as they choose to nourish their body. And this is something that I will work on for the rest of my life. I do not want to fall back into those old ways of anorexia and punishment and self-loathing, because it feels like I'm breaking my own heart, just like drinking all over again. It feels like I'm abandoning myself again. So maybe I'm recording this to hold myself accountable, because lately with Ozempic and diet culture, and everyone around me is 80 pounds. P.S. I'm just going to say this, everyone around me is losing weight. I mean, all over social media, all over reality TV, every woman is super thin. And the runways are back with heroin-chic models that are so thin that it's scary. And so it's really easy for me personally to go down those rabbit holes, to get sucked into social media and think, oh gosh, I could trim a few pounds. I should probably walk some more, put my Fitbit on and get those 10,000 steps, skip dinner. Those thoughts are creeping in. I am not sitting here on this mic acting like I am the most body positive, healed, holier than thou woman. I still struggle all the time. And part of holding myself accountable is saying it out loud. Just like recovering from alcohol, recover out loud. I say this stuff out loud. I have brought these conversations to sobriety meetings. And so many women have been like, me too, same. I starved myself, same. I used to binge and purge, same. I mean, the overlapping correlation between disordered eating and alcohol is very, very high. It's something like 1 in 5. And so I think this was just a really good way to tie this all together. I really want to blame pop culture. I want to blame, but I also want to take accountability. And I think that's essentially what this book made me do. It's like, it wasn't your fault, but it's your fucking responsibility. So I'm just going to remind myself that a well-fed woman with a clear mind is dangerous. And the patriarchy has always known this. So I hope this was good food for thought. Share this with someone who needs it. Or just, rage email me and, we can talk about this together. Okay, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for spending this time with me. I love you all so very much, and I mean it. You can find me on all the socials, at Rewired Sober. The links to join my coaching program are always in the show notes, as well as an email if you want to get in touch with the pod. So until next time.